Whoa. Landing an account this big will totally change my landscaping business. It's gonna mean hiring more guys and more equipment and new trucks for the new guys to drive the new equipment in. I don't know if I'm ready.
You can do this, and Ford Pro FinSimple can help. Our experts are ready to make growing pains less painful for your business with flexible financing solutions that meet the needs of your business today when you need them. Get started at fordpro.com/financing.
My dad works in B2B marketing. He came by my school for career day and said he was a big ROAS man. Then he told everyone how much he loved calculating his return on ad spend. My friends still laugh at me to this day.
Not everyone gets B2B, but with LinkedIn, you'll be able to reach people who do. Get a $100 credit on your next ad campaign. Go to linkedin.com/results to claim your credit. That's linkedin.com/results. Terms and conditions apply. LinkedIn, the place to be, to be.
Think you know the Brooks Ghost? Think again. Introducing the all-new, better-than-ever Ghost 16. Now with nitrogen-infused cushioning for lightweight, supreme softness that feels good every step, every street, every single day. So go ahead, take your daily joyride in the all-new nitrogen-infused Ghost 16. It'll turn your everyday miles into everyday endorphins. Let's run there. Head to brooksrunning.com to learn more.
Picture it. It's Saturday morning. The TV is on and you have your Hot Wheels or Matchbox cars out while eating a bowl of cereal and making vroom-vroom noises. Now imagine it's 2008 and you're doing the same thing. Not as pretty a picture when you're older, is it? Don't worry, we won't hold it against you, but we will tell you that Speed Racer is not that bad. Welcome one and all to It's Not That Bad, the podcast that looks for A grades and B movies and a proud member of the Pantheon Podcast Network. I'm going to do my best to try to keep my little mouth-made car noises to myself. I'm going to try and keep the vrooms and the zooms and the down to a minimum because I don't want to destroy your ears. Even though this movie tried to destroy my eyes. We are talking about Speed Racer. And here to join me, Carson Alcombe is back on the show. Carson, welcome back, man. How are you doing?
I'm living the dream. We're about to talk about one of the most criminally underrated, one of the most beautiful, and yet emotionally draining movies that I have ever seen.
So when you dropped me a line and said, hey, we should do Speed Racer, how much coke were you on when you did that?
Surprisingly, zero. No, this is such a close and dear movie to my heart. And there's so many things that just fit in these perfect little puzzle piece sections in my brain that it just absolutely adores. And I think you're going to be quite sold after the end of this episode on some interesting things I have to say here.
Oh, I usually am pretty darn interested. And the other thing, too, is that I remember watching this show as a kid on Saturday mornings, or it was on in the afternoon, because holy crap, this is, peak childhood cartoons for me. Did you watch the cartoon growing up?
Absolutely, I did. It was something that when I wasn't watching Pixar's Cars, I was watching either reruns of the Speed Racer movie on TV or I was watching the cartoon.
Yeah, see, for me, this was like right around that time, and I'm really, really going to show my age here. So please bear with me, dear listeners, and try not to laugh too hard at me. But I mean, I remember watching this, it would be like this and Battle of the Planets and Hercules, the Hercules where every single monster sounded like wah, wah, wah. Every monster. I guarantee you go back and watch that cartoon. Every monster made the same damn noise. But Speed Racer, now I know where I get my penchant for talking really fast, because you had to be up on some really sugary cereal to keep up with some of the dialogue in that cartoon.
It's wild how interestingly paced the movie is. And that's from the dialogue to the story elements to the emotional kind of turmoil. And it's such a different way of making a movie, because in the moment you'll be in one scene, you'll understand everything. And then all of a sudden you're 10 years in the past and you're like, what just happened? Or you're 3 weeks in the future and you're like, what just happened? So the pacing is quite interesting, but it leads to a lot of moments that really resonate, I feel like, with an audience.
By the way, dear listeners, if you want to go back and watch the original Speed Racer cartoon, you can watch it for free on Plex. So, I mean, you just got to sit through a couple of ads. But you know what? I'm all for fast networks. Completely down with that. But it's time to talk the movie Speed Racer. But before we do, it is time to take this anime adaptation and trailerize it.
You've watched Formula One Drive to Survive, but have you ever watched it strapped into a torture chair with your eyes pried open with toothpicks after shotgunning a six-pack of Red Bull, all the while hopped up on goofballs? No? You're doing it wrong. But you will feel that way after watching Speed Racer. Emil Hirsch will have you saying, huh, as he survives explosions, assassination attempts, and reckless beyond belief driving as he looks to win the deadliest races in the world. Witness as he straight up murders the competition. Literally. No, seriously. I watched that car explode. Dude was dead. Drivers got pushed off the side of a mountain. He straight up murdered them. How has he not been arrested? Also, he's trafficking monkeys around the world. Isn't there a zoo with an empty cage and just as many unanswered questions? Also, who the hell names their kid Speed Racer? I mean, what's next? Willpower? Oh, never mind. Emil Hirsch is Speed Racer. Rated PG. For press the G button.
Well done. Well done. The only other thing I have to comment on that is, why would you name your kid Spritle?
I mean, what's worse, Spritle or Speed Racer?
I don't know, because when I think of Spritle, I think of like Sprocket or like a socket for like tool wise. I'm like, is that the connection they tried to make? And I'm like, I don't even know. But I mean, such is life from a 50-year-old cartoon that originally was an anime. So,
although that being said, major missed promotional opportunity for Sprite in this movie. I mean, come on.
They got Skittles in there, though.
I think that's what was fueling all the animators at this point. We're just going to feed them sugar and Red Bull and tons of Sprite, and they're going to make the movie for us. That's how it's going to happen.
I would agree. And in certain respects, I would agree. But you know what? I think to get out of the way early is just, you got to realize that this movie came out in the same year as Iron Man and The Dark Knight. And those two films are some of the most aesthetically pleasing modern blockbusters to this day. So when you look at another big company in Warner Brothers, they clearly have the money to do this. And based on the film's budget, which is insane when you include the marketing side of things, they could have done it. But they stuck to what I like to think as a more faithful interpretation, despite the fact that sometimes you feel like you're on an acid trip.
Yeah, I thought about checking myself into rehab after watching this film, because I thought I was having like really weird trips, but we'll get to that in a little bit.
Ryan Reynolds here from Mint Mobile. With the price of just about everything going up during inflation, we thought we'd bring our prices down. So to help us, we brought in a reverse auctioneer, which is apparently a thing.
Mint Mobile Unlimited Premium Wireless. How to get 30, 30, bit to get 30, bit to get 20, 20, 20, bit to get 20, 20, bit to get 15, 15, 15, 15, just $15 a month? Sold! Give it a try at mintmobile.com/switch.
$45 upfront payment equivalent to $15 per month. New customers on first 3-month plan only. Taxes and fees extra. Speed slower above 40 gigabytes. See detail.
But let's get into who is in this film. A film that the idea for doing a Speed Racer movie actually started in 1992. So in some of these situations, some of these references that we're about to talk about stem all the way back to the 90s. So strap in. There's a lot to talk about here. The movie stars Emil Hirsch, Christina Ricci, John Goodman, Susan Sarandon, Matthew Fox, Roger Allam, and Polly Little. There is quite the almost starring in here. So bear with me here. We're going to start with a cameo that could have happened. Danica Patrick was offered a cameo in the film, but had to decline doing racing commitments. And dear listeners, 2008, that would have been a big, big deal. In the role of Racer X. So let's go through some of these. Keanu Reeves apparently turned down the role. And I'm sitting there looking at this going, oh, damn. If Keanu Reeves was Racer X, hells yeah.
That would have been sick. I mean, not just because I love Keanu Reeves, but like, he's got the motorcycle side of his personality. He's done semi-professional racing. Like, his demeanor, like, that would have been the perfect role for Keanu. And I mean, getting like reuniting with the Wachowskis too, like, it just would have been perfect. But do you know why he ended up turning it down?
I honestly do not know why he turned it down. All it said was he turned down the role. Also, Vince Vaughn at one point was attached to produce the film and star as Racer X back in 2004. I'm so glad it's not Vince Vaughn.
You know what? I would have liked to see his interpretation of kind of how he wanted to go with it, but I feel like he could have done that as just a producer. I don't know if I needed him to be in the movie. Like, I don't know if I could have taken Racer X's storyline as seriously if it was Vince Vaughn. And I kind of feel bad about saying that because I do like a few Vince Vaughn movies and seems like a good enough person from the little I know. But it's just Matthew Fox gives a really good vibe here and a really good role. And as much as I would like to see Keanu too, I feel like they found a pretty suitable candidate.
Now, going back to the 90s when there were talks of doing a Speed Racer film, two actors were offered the role of Racer X. Henry Rollins and Nicolas Cage. Henry Rollins, I actually don't think I would have minded. And I'll be the first to tell you that Henry Rollins, to me, is the worst part of Johnny Mnemonic, but I could see him as Racer X.
It's just that like inherent kind of look where it's like a little bit more of a rugged, quiet guy, but also a person that looks like any Hollywood white man ever. And Racer X is kind of in the middle of that situation.
But Nick Cage, like Nick Cage? Nick freaking Cage?
Yeah, it would have been interesting. I don't know if I like that's kind of falls in the same sector as Vince Vaughn, where I just don't know if I could have taken it seriously.
I mean, there was a bee attack in this film, and Nick Cage? Not the bees! Not the bees!
Throwing it back.
Nick Cage. In the role of Speed Racer, I'm going to throw these names at you here. Now, these are people who were considered for the role throughout the idea of doing this film. So some of them date back to the 90s. Some of them, are within the production cycle. Shia LaBeouf, Joseph Gordon-Levitt, Zac Efron, and Johnny Depp. Of those four, would you have wanted to see any of them as Speed Racer?
I mean, I don't think Johnny Depp would fit inherently to me. He doesn't give off the boyish charm, I'll say. Because, I mean, Speed Racer's 18 in the movie. like, and Johnny Depp would have been, what, mid to late 30s at that point?
Yeah, I mean, you have to think that the Depp offering was probably back in the 90s.
Oh, yeah, for sure it was. I remember when I was doing some research, too, and the initial, like, when Warner Brothers bought the rights to do the movie. I think it was in 92 or 93. Like, they held onto the rights for a good 15 years before this thing got made. But, yeah, Johnny Depp just, I guess back then I could have seen it. But I'm glad that Emile Hirsch did get the role. But out of those kind of groupings, like, Zac Efron kind of catches my eye.
Yeah, he's the one that kind of, stood out as being not completely out of the realm of possibility.
Especially for the time the movie came out in 08. Like, he was, you could argue, like, with High School Musical, like, that was around, like, one of the highest points of his career, just in terms of kind of how in your face he was on a kids movie level. And I'll say from, like, the 7 to 12, 13 range, right? So, like, I easily could have seen it happening, but I guess he stuck tried and true to his Disney roots at that point.
In the role of Trixie, again, I'm going to toss you the three names here. I know who I would cast, but I want to hear your thoughts, okay? So take Christina Ricci out of the equation. Of these three actresses that were potentially considered for the role of Trixie, Alicia Cuthbert, Kate Mara, and Rose McGowan. Of those three, who would you have put into that role?
I'm trying to be unbiased because I actually lived near Alicia Cuthbert, or at least one of her summer homes when I lived in Kelowna, and I actually met her once. Absolute darling, by the way. She was out walking a big Great Pyrenees, just a lovely person.
Wait, are you saying Alicia Cuthbert was actually the girl next door?
She was close to. She was damn close to, yeah. I mean, she was dating Dion Phaneuf at the time, though, so I don't know if I would have been able to even get on that level. I think I would have gotten puck to my teeth. But no, I honestly think Alicia Cuthbert could have done a really good job. Like, obviously, I think in the latter part of her career here, like, she hasn't been around as much. She's been definitely on the quieter side of things. But even when you look back in the 2000s, someone I kind of compare to her in a lot of ways, just on a kind of inherent vibe level, is Jennifer Morrison.
Mm-hmm.
And I feel like just from an outsider's perspective, not including those three names, she could have made, I feel like, a really good Trixie as well. But I'm going to go with Alicia Cuthbert.
I mean, yes. Does Rose McGowan have a very Christina Ricci look about her in 2008? Yes, absolutely. Kate Mara, I don't think she gets the credit that she deserves. I mean, she got through the Fantastic film, so that's good. But I think Kate Mara would have been fantastic in this, but I have thoughts. Most of them are all good about Christina Ricci. But I'm just saying, if of those three, I probably would have gone with Kate Mara.
I think that's a fair choice, too. Like, given her career trajectory and just like the age at the time and kind of the shoe and fit, like, I can easily see that working out very well.
The movie was directed by the Wachowskis. However, there were some people attached to it, A, during the 90s, and B, afterwards. Alfonso Cuarón was hired briefly in 1997, but then didn't do it, obviously. Julian Temple dropped out due to delays. Hype Williams and Gus Van Sant were also attached to this, but I mean, this is the Wachowskis. This project almost seemed tailor-made for them.
They got a lot of crap for this movie. And I know in previous conversations we've had on different episodes, we've talked about films just not being ready yet. You give it 20 years, and then it really starts to resonate with people. And I think this is where we're kind of getting with Speed Racer. If you go online, you look up current reviews, if you look up YouTube videos on the film itself, I would say it's 90% really positive reaction. So I think this was a point where the Wachowskis were so high coming off the Matrix trilogy. And obviously, they just, when you had the likes of Iron Man, The Dark Knight, and some other massive 2008 movies, the vibe just didn't fit with what the summer blockbuster kind of entailed. I feel like there were so many factors that really hindered their ability to make this resonate with people at the time. And I think we're reaching a state in society where you look back at the early 2000s and the 90s, 80s, and it's a lot of movies' inherent themes turn out to be a love story at the end, or there's a big partnership aspect involved. And if you look at the trajectory of film nowadays, it's a lot about family healing. And that's a really, really big theme in Speed Racer. And I think that definitely had the Wachowskis ahead of their time based on when this came out.
There were some accolades for this film, so let's get to the good ones first. At the 2008 MTV Movie Awards, the movie was nominated for Best Summer Movie So Far, lost to Iron Man. At the 2008 Teen Choice Awards, the movie was nominated for Choice Movie Action Adventure, lost to The Chronicles of Narnia, Prince Caspian. Emile Hirsch was nominated for Choice Movie Actor in an Action Adventure Film, lost to Shia LaBeouf for Indiana Jones and the Kingdom of the Crystal Skull. And Christina Ricci was nominated for Choice Movie Actress in an Action or Adventure Film, lost to Rachel Bilson for Jumper. Rachel Bilson's another actress that would have been fantastic in that role.
When you said the name, I thought the same thing. I'm like, that would have fit like a shoe.
Yeah, but I freaking love Jumper. I will defend that film, and I know I'm going to have to someday, but I freaking love that film.
I've only seen like half of it, and it was just because it was on a TV rerun like 5 or 6 years ago. And I remember loving the first half, so I do have to go back and watch that as well.
Oh, absolutely. At the 2009 Visual Effects Society Awards, it was nominated for Outstanding Matte Paintings in a Feature Motion Picture, lost to Changeling. At the 2008 St. Louis Film Critics Association Awards, It was nominated for Best Visual Effects, lost to The Dark Knight. Like, I like The Dark Knight. I love The Dark Knight. I think The Dark Knight is one of the best superhero films of all time. I don't know if it deserved Best Visual Effects over this film.
No, I agree with you. I'm sitting here like, it's excellent. It's does everything near perfectly, but like visually speaking, it has really nice shots. It's a very dim, kind of dark movie. It feels the vibe, but like in terms of visual effects, like what really is there besides Batman's like X-ray mode at the third act of the movie?
Yeah, no. The movie was also nominated for Most Original, Innovative, or Creative Film, lost to The Curious Case of Benjamin Button. And you know what? Not a bad film to lose to when it comes to innovative and creative. It's kind of out there, and I kind of like that. At the 2008 Golden Schmoes Awards, it was nominated for Most Underrated Movie of the Year, lost to In Bruges, but it won for Trippiest Movie of the Year, and you damn right.
Do you think anyone showed up to accept that award?
If they did, they were probably baked out of their tree. And at the 2009 Razzies, it was nominated for Worst Prequel, Remake, Ripoff, or Sequel, lost to Indiana Jones and the Kingdom of the Crystal Skull. The film had a budget of $120 million domestically. It only made $43 million, and worldwide only $93 million. So that is a major box office flop for a major IP property.
Especially when you look at the marketing budget attached onto that, which was an additional $80 million to market this movie. It had McDonald's toys, it had the Hot Wheels, it had model cars, it had a video game, it had multiple video games actually. It had every single bit of merchandise you could think of, and it was 2/3 of the newest Indiana Jones movie, and that came out in 2023. Like, it's absolutely absurd to think of how much money went into this. And you have to think that Warner Brothers was expecting this to become a franchise in a way.
Yeah, and I have more on that to talk about a little bit later, but we'll get there. When the film debuted on the May 9th, 2008 weekend, it debuted at number 3, the lowest grossing debut that week, with only $18.5 million. The highest grossing debut, just slightly over top of it, was What Happens in Vegas with $20 million. The number one film that week was the second week of Iron Man with $51 million. But the reason why we are here, and not just because Carson likes to go vroom vroom and zoom zoom, are the critics. Over at Metacritic, this film has a Metascore of 37. At IMDb, it has a 6.1 star rating for 61%. At Letterboxd, it has 3.4 stars for a 68%. At the movie database, it sits at 63%. And at Rotten Tomatoes, the tomatometer is at 42%, and the audience score is at 60. Giving this film an aggravated aggregate of 55.16%. I'm not going to lie. The Metacritic score being the lowest of all of that seems like a sharp blow to this film.
Incredibly. Like, I'm not going to lie to you. If I had to put this on Rotten Tomatoes right now and I had to make my own percentage, I'm probably putting this at a 90. Like, I'm not going to lie to you. That's how much I think this movie continues to improve with time. Was this your first viewing, or have you seen it before?
First viewing. I raw dogged this. I went in straight.
Wild. Okay. Like, it's so interesting because the people that watch it kind of right around this time, and I can say that because I recently watched it actually a few months back with a group of friends. One of them had seen it, two of them hadn't. It was really split on the two that had it. One person absolutely loved it, loved the thematic choices, loved the emotional resonation, loved what the story kind of did and how uniquely paced it was. And the other was just appalled at this thing even being released. So like, it's such a wild duality, and maybe it's something that kind of leans towards cinephiles in a way and what it was trying to do and really create. But on the other hand, it can be interpreted as a bit of a mess. And I think that's what makes the conversation around this movie so incredibly interesting.
And you have to think that if you were to poll, just your average ordinary movie fan, you'd probably get a split reaction. If you were to poll anime specific fans, you'd probably also get a split reaction. Like, I have a feeling this movie is basically like Rush. You either love Rush or you hate Rush. There is no in between. I think with Speed Racer, it's like you either really like it or you really don't. I don't know how you can, pardon the pun now, I don't know how you can drive down the middle of the road on this one.
I absolutely agree. Are you an avid Letterboxd user, Jason?
I do use it a little bit, but I will say that I'm not, I don't log every film that I watch.
No, I'm the same way. But before this episode, like about 20 minutes before, I was curious because I was going through all the reviews as well. And I was like, what's the Letterboxd kind of average? And I looked it up, and it's probably like, how in Letterboxd they show like the little graph of how there's the half a star, so on and so forth. This was one of the most split movies I've ever seen on Letterboxd. There was a massive chunk of 5-star, 4.5, 4, 3.5, 3, and it's like it almost was a flat graph when it came to the Letterboxd reviews, which shows how absolutely decisive and divisive this movie is.
Yeah, so let's get into why that is with our breakdown. We're going to start, of course, with Emile Hirsch as Speed Racer. Someone who is up against an unwinnable battle, but I'm going to start with you. Your thoughts on him?
It's so hard nowadays because when I was growing up, like Emile Hirsch in this movie, like was the man to me. Like if you're looking at the late 70s into the 80s and like Luke Skywalker was your guy when you're growing up, like Emile Hirsch was that man to me. I loved Speed Racer. And then he like sort of got semi-canceled like a few years ago for his assault charges. And now he's, I assume, kind of blacklisted based on the fact that we rarely see him in anything. But I love him in this. Like to me, Emile Hirsch was made for Speed Racer. Like you went through the other people that could have played him. You went through kind of the surroundings and back to the 90s of who was pitched, but there's still in like my brain and in my heart, no one else that could really encapsulate Speed Racer more than Emile Hirsch did.
Yeah. And for the record, dear listeners, when it comes to actors who have done, to put it bluntly, things in real life, always remember that when we talk about them in relation to the movie that we are reviewing, we are only talking about them and their performance in the film. You can like a piece of art and not like the artist. It's not just because you like this movie doesn't mean you always support the person in real life. So just know that we are talking about Speed Racer, the film, and Emile Hirsch and his performance as Speed Racer. Nothing more than that. Here's the problem with Emile Hirsch. And it's not the performance. It's not. He, as I said, is fighting the unwinnable battle because no matter how good he is, no matter how hard he tries, and no matter how close to the original cartoon that he gets, he will never be the star of this film. No one will. The star, rightfully so, is the Mach 5. It's like, to some, Star Wars, the star of the film is the freaking Millennium Falcon.
It's the Batmobile. It's Paul Walker's Skyline. It's the Ecto-1. It's the DeLorean. Absolutely it is.
Yeah. Honestly, toys sell these films. And the Mach 5 is one of the earliest examples of the toy sells the product. Because I tell you, if someone gave me a Mach 5 Hot Wheels or Matchbox or whoever was making them at the time, when I was a kid watching this, I'd be like, oh, all right, he's going to do the jump, and he's going to do this, and he's going to do that, and I'm going to walk around and go, oh. And that's pretty much what it's going to be. I love the fact that they have him going, oh, oh. And I was like, oh my God, someone watched this cartoon way too much. I do like him in this, though, but it's hard to say I like Speed Racer without saying because the Mach 5 is the coolest car in the world.
I want one so badly. Like if someone made a production Mach 5, I would shut up and take my money. But and you said it right there yourself. Like it is such a very much toys to life movie. Like I remember on Christmas 2008 getting the Mach 5, the Mach 4, Racer X's car, and the Royalton Industries car as well, and just being infatuated for hours. I remember opening them. I remember going back, putting the DVD in my player, rewatching the movie while playing with them. It even got so nuts. And I'm going to go into a wild Carson background story for a minute. I remember when they released the McDonald's toys of Speed Racer in 2008. And I remember in 6th grade going to McDonald's with two of my buddies, and we got the cars. And I remember going up to the lady and asking for the Mach 6 because I already had the one she gave me, and she gave me one. And we went into the play place and we would flick the cars up and down the slide to recreate the movie. It is, and the reason I'm saying this is because I still get the same adult feeling watching this movie now as I did playing with the toys watching it then. It just kind of grew with me. Like every time I watched the movie too, I gained something different from it. And that's another reason why I believe this movie continues to become more popular with time.
Oh, yeah. I mean, Knight Rider doesn't exist. Like the Mach 5 drove so that Kit could speed. That's basically how it boils down at this point. And like even the Dukes of Hazzard with the General Lee, right? Like they're the A-Team with the black van. Like this is what you want. You wanted like the murderer's row of TV and movie cars in your collection when you were a kid. Not that anything has changed at all, because I'm still that kid. But yeah, like, and that's, it's unfortunate though. Like going into a film like this, like even with the Dukes of Hazzard, and we covered that movie earlier on this podcast.
The Johnny Knoxville, Sean William Scott, Dukes of
Yes.
Hazzard.
Yeah.
That's also holds a place in my heart, but continue.
Yeah. But I mean, like the biggest thing about that film is that the General Lee was the General Lee. That's all you needed out of that film. The General Lee was the General Lee. Everything else, you could have messed up everything else. And trust me, they tried. But the General Lee is still there. And that's awesome. Same thing with this.
So when you were a kid watching the anime and the TV show, the re-releases in North America, and the Mach 5 would have all those gadgets on the steering wheel. Then you watch this next movie, and in reality, the first car you see is the Mach 6, so the new version. Did you die a little bit inside at first, but then when they got to the Casa Cristo rally scene, and you see all the gadgets appear and they go through them all, did it then bring it back up to your childhood self?
I mean, I never left my childhood self. Now, let me give you a little background here. So I used to produce a segment on television about sports and technology. And one of the first episodes that we did for that show, we got to go, behind the scenes at when it was still under kart, when it was Champ Car Racing. We got to go behind the scenes at the time it was the Molson Indy, and they pulled the steering wheel out of one of the cars and showed it to us. And it was just like, oh my God. In the back of my mind, I'm like, oh my God, it's the Mach 5 with all the buttons. It's the freaking Mach 5. This is the coolest thing ever. And the thing is, when you think about when the cartoon originally came out, there's no buttons on the wheel in the cars. Now it's like Formula One and IndyCar are driving the Mach 5 with as many buttons on there.
And then you go to like IndyCar even is a step down. You go to Formula One and you look at the steering wheels they have nowadays, like 2024, and you're like, this is the most complicated piece of technology I've ever seen in my existence.
Yeah. And we've talked about racing films on this show before. We talked about Days of Thunder. Like we know we're racing people. We get it. We like it. So that's why probably, and I wonder if you talk to those movie fans who might be split on this film, follow-up question, do you like auto racing? And I bet you anything, anyone who says they like this film would probably skew high on the liking auto racing scale. And those who don't like it probably don't.
100%. And I do think at points it's such an incredible bonus to this movie and such a builder, but also can be a detriment depending on where you fall on that scale. One of my favorite scenes, arguably my favorite scene in this entire movie, is when Speed Racer returns to Royalton Industry headquarters and brings back the suit to give Royalton. And Royalton ends up going on that long speech about how every race is actually about business. And every race back in the day was strategized for a certain result. and how the only reason that existed was to improve and decrease different stock shares for business. And then he goes on that incredible last part of it where he's like, if you want to grow up and become a real race car driver, you'll turn around and sign that contract. And I think there's so much internally that I can relate to as a fan of auto racing, because a lot of it in 2024, you can have a kid, 18-year-old with so much talent, but no money, no business backing him, no sponsorship. And he'll lose out on a car to someone that has a family business with millions of dollars throughout the years that can now put a logo on that car. And at the end of the day, all the team cares about, to an extent, is at least having a revenue stream for a volatile of a sport as racing, where you can crash and blow $500,000 in an instant. So I think to so many kind of results here in the film, there's so many deep accuracies as a racing fan, but at the same time, I can understand someone who's just here for a good time, for a good movie, not quite understanding how much that holds and resonates with a lot of people.
Oh, yeah. I mean, like, anyone who has watched Formula One Drive to Survive knows just how much team dynamics play as far as, you know, success in Formula One. I mean, you take a look at Valtteri Bottas right now, who is the worst driver on the Formula One circuit this year, being 2024. And yet, for the longest stretch, of course, it was him and Hamilton in Mercedes, and they were unstoppable, the two of them. You go to the wrong team, and you're watching the backs of cars as opposed to everyone watching your back.
All respect to my North American Logan Sargent, but I think you're giving Valtteri Bottas too little credit given Logan Sargent being in the field this year.
Okay, well, we're getting a little deep into the woods here, but Logan Sargent never drove for Mercedes. There's the difference. I was going to say,
yeah, back on track, no pun intended.
Right. Christina Ricci as Trixie, your thoughts?
I really liked her. Like, there's honestly, and I'm going to tell you in the audience up front right now, there's not a single casting choice in this film that I don't absolutely love. From John Goodman, Susan Sarandon, Christina Ricci, like everyone. To me, like, and I'm really trying to put aside my childhood biases, but even rewatching this movie now, I watched it on Sunday. It's just still is brilliant with its casting. And that's such a strong point in this film to me.
Yeah. I mean, the fact that she kind of looks the part anyways.
Oh, really, easily.
Yeah, really kind of adds to things. But the thing with Trixie, though, is that she's not just, you know, there to cheer Speed on. She does things. She is Speed's defender from early childhood. She gets in the car and she's as good a driver as Speed himself. Like, they took Trixie and really made her more than what she was in the cartoon. And I think that's fantastic. And the funny thing, too, is this is such a different role for her from not that long ago. Because, dear listeners, I'm going to remind you that 2006, 2 years prior to this film, she was in Black Snake Moan. And that is way different than this film.
She literally throat kicks a mafia guy. Like, she's an absolute badass in this movie. Our driver goes down sick, and instead of getting a relief driver or whatever else exists in this universe, she gets in that car and starts shredding it. Like, we do not give Christina Ricci enough credit for the delivery, let alone the character of Trixie in this movie.
Oh, absolutely. By the way, the little girl who plays young Trixie in this is Ariel Winter. So you even have an early Ariel Winter appearance in this. But I mean, I love Christina Ricci. I think she's awesome. I think she takes on roles that challenge, roles that, you know, she'll go this way one year and then she'll go this way another. She takes on real good, meaty roles, even if sometimes the role is kind of just fun and out there, but she does it so well.
Gives it her absolute all, to be quite honest.
Yeah. Christina Ricci, like, I know she gets her flowers. She gets the praise that she, you know, deserves. But for this film, holy crap, the film was better off because of her.
Easily. That's one of something we can absolutely agree on too, is that she just adds so much substance to this film.
John Goodman, who plays Pop, someone who feels born to play a cartoon character. Your thoughts?
Buddy did not have to show up and slay the way this man did. He could have just came in, taken his paycheck, and left. But John Goodman is arguably tied for my favorite character in this movie. The guy's first off a badass. I kind of like the way he quote unquote heads the household, if you want to interpret it that way. I think he resonates with not only a lot of racing fans as the builder of these cars, but a lot of people that grew up through the 80s, 90s and kind of had that father figure that was quite macho, kind of had a sensitive side, but you never really saw a lot of difference out of him, if that makes sense.
This is the role that kind of gives him a redemption arc from the Flintstones.
That I can 100% agree with.
Like, don't get me wrong. I'm sure when the day comes and we got to talk about the Flintstones, I'm sure I'll be sitting there going, yeah, the Flintstones is horrible, but John Goodman's a gem. Well, Speed Racer is not horrible. John Goodman is still a gem. And the thing is, he's like a gentle giant in this film. Like, that's the way he comes across. He comes across like someone who literally would be called Pops. And I don't know who else you would even think of putting in that role.
I don't know who would come to mind. Like, I'm trying to think of someone that really fits his bravado. I'm kind of blanking right now.
I mean, at times, does he look a little bit like a steroided out Super Mario brother? Yeah, sure, maybe, okay. But also, John Goodman is a super roided out Super Mario brother. Dear Hollywood, make this happen. Like, I'm sure now they would probably put in Chris Pratt, because why not? But I don't want Bob Hoskins in this role. I want John Goodman, because again, he's also an imposing figure. It's not like he's a short man. He's a big guy.
He's soft but intimidating. He fits the role brilliantly.
Susan Sarandon. Yes, Susan Sarandon as Mom Racer. Your thoughts?
So this is, I know I said previously that there's not a single bad casting choice in this movie, and I still don't think there is, but Susan Sarandon, in terms of a script perspective, is very much just a support character, which is a little disappointing, but it also, unlike Trixie, who kind of takes a back seat in the cartoon, but then takes a really big leap in character development in the movie, Mom Racer and Susan Sarandon kind of stay the same. Like, she's always just kind of there for me, but then she has these moments, like when she's comforting Speed after Rex dies in the Casa Cristo accident. Like, that's a beautifully shot scene of her just holding her son after such a traumatic event. And then you see it kind of jump to the present time at the race, and she's got the similar facial expression. Like, she does everything right. I think she's just hindered by what the script and character kind of gave her in the movie.
Yeah. I mean, obviously when you see Susan Sarandon, you're like, oh, it's Susan Sarandon. It must be a prestige role. Need I remind you, dear listeners, that Susan Sarandon graced the screen in the Rocky Horror Picture Show. But, you know, when you take a look at a picture of Mom Racer from the cartoon, they did okay in finding someone who looks a little bit like her. But the thing is, John Goodman kind of disappears in the role of Pops. Christina Ricci disappears in the role of Trixie, even though it's clearly Christina Ricci, right? But she kind of disappears in that role. Emile Hirsch disappears into the role of Speed. Susan Sarandon is still Susan Sarandon. Like, I look at her and it's like, okay, it's Susan Sarandon. It doesn't change.
No, I am on board with you. And it's a little disappointing because, like I said before, you get these leaps and bounds of this character development changes to where it really resonates with the audience. And she's just kind of there being her, which I love Susan Sarandon. All power to her. I have no quarrels, love her and pretty much everything I see her in. But I just can't help but wanting more. Like, tell me, like, you see Papa Bear come out in Pop's Racer. I want to see Mama Bear come out at some point. Like, when he and the family is having the meeting with Royalton, like, I want to see that Mama Bear energy come out and have that same energy as Pops does.
Yeah. The script didn't give her really anything to work with. It's like they came in and said, please just be Susan Sarandon for a few shots and we'll be fine.
She's truthfully a sounding board for Emile Hirsch's emotions in this film.
Yeah. And probably there to hold Trixie's hand while everyone sits there and prays that Speed doesn't die.
Easily.
Polly lit as Spritle, and we're going to talk about Chim Chim, the chimp, at the same time.
So I want to preface by starting saying I have absolutely no issue with him as an actor whatsoever. Like, Polly lit to me is a charming young kid. He sells it really well. It's just the fact that with the tone of this movie, he doesn't fit in at all. Not to mention that some of the most impactful and emotional scenes in this movie are then cutaways to him and Chim Chim doing something just beyond words as to why this is happening. And because of this, I'm not going to encourage anyone to bootleg stream anything. That's not what I'm saying here. But you can, in fact, somewhere on the internet, find a stream of Speed Racer where every scene with Chim Chim and Spritle is cut out, and it does not change the movie. I'll leave that there.
You're not saying it, but you're not saying it.
Well, I don't know what you're talking about.
Exactly, right? And neither does everybody else. Wink, wink. Look, I don't like to talk ill of child actors, and I'm not going to here because, again, Polly Litt is given a script, and he executed what was on the script pretty damn good. And Chim Chim for monkey actors, all good. But this comes back to the original cartoon, and let me diatribe here for a second, if I may. The problem with some of those cartoons is that you always had to have that one character that was there to, I guess, hold the kids watching attention, right? Spritle and Chim Chim were there for the kids, the littler kids watching. Like, you think about two brothers watching this film, right? Or at least the TV show. The older kid's gonna be sitting there watching for the races and the car explosions and the action. And the younger one's gonna be watching for Spritle and Chim Chim getting into trouble. Okay, that's pretty much what it boils down to. You know, watching Battle of the Planets, you had 7 Zark 7. I could have done without the discount, Kirkland brand R2D2. You talk about the Godzilla cartoon and Godzuki. No! Godzuki, we don't need him there, all right? The cartoon did not need Spritle and Chim Chim. It took away from the stories in the cartoons. If the movie had decided not to put Spritle and Chim Chim in, I'm actually okay with not taking everything from the cartoon. But I wonder, and I'm going to put this question to you, Carson. Had they taken the daring leap to eliminate Spritle and Chim Chim from this film, as certain streaming versions without them in it apparently do you think the Speed Racer fandom would have argued at their absence?
I personally don't think so. And I say that because when you actually rewatch some of the cartoon, which I decided to do on Monday night because I was bored and thought, hey, let's see how there's some changes here. When you actually rewatch the cartoon, it's actually a really similar vibe to the movie where something pretty wicked will be going on that you want to see. And then all of a sudden now you see Chim Chim throw his own feces at someone, which at the end of the day is fine. Do what you want. It is at the end of the day a kid's movie. But they are both there for strictly child comic relief. And now I'm going to pose this question to you. If you take out every scene with Chim Chim and Spritle, is this still a PG movie?
I think it's a PG-13. I think it definitely goes
exactly.
I think it definitely goes up a notch, but then it's aimed at, and let's get into this now because this feels like the perfect time to do this. Okay, this cartoon was out in the 60s, so it's now at this point 2008. That's like a 40-year difference, right? Yes, kids are going to want to go see Speed Racer because it looks cool. It looks awesome. It looks like a video game. It's basically what it looks like the coolest freaking video game. But they're not there for Speed Racer nostalgia. The people who are there for Speed Racer nostalgia are probably sitting there going, oh yeah, Speed Racer, Speed Racer. Oh, I forgot about Spritle and Chim Chim. Oh, it's going to be 2 hours of this.
It's funny you say that too, because going back to the conversation we had about how the real star is the car, I'm not going to lie to you. I was showed a few movies at a young age that I probably shouldn't have seen them, like a lot of people have in the world. I think back to being 4 years old and watching a skip through version of the Dukes of Hazzard with my dad. And when I think of that movie, I didn't need inherent comic relief because I loved the car. And you have enough entertaining racing in this movie that you don't need the comic relief, because the fun and the color and the speed is all there for the kids already. So it's kind of like putting a hat on a hat.
Yeah, it was unnecessary. Although I can understand if you're trying to bring in new fans to the franchise and try to build a brand new audience for Speed Racer based on the people who were going there for the nostalgia, having their own kids and wanting them to have something to look at, maybe. But I just found it pulled away from the story on the screen. Give that time and more to do back to Mom Racer and Susan Sarandon, and little less Spritle and Chim Chim hopped up on candy.
100%. And once again, it's like, even if you're not going to utilize Susan Sarandon, there's still no reason you can't have Spritle and Chim Chim be useful characters to an extent. Like, think about the start of the movie when Speed is just a kid and he's with Racer or his like Rex. There's a really heavy emotional resonance in there that a lot of people can relate to, with a brother or a sister or whoever it may have been. And then you just use Spritle and Chim Chim as a shoehorn to get, I don't even know if it's to get kids in theater, because I don't even know if it's viewed as that, but to just get a break in maybe some of the more serious tones. But like, even if you just gave Spritle and Speed a better relationship similar to the one that paralleled Rex and Speed's, you instantly have a completely different interpretation of Spritle and Chim Chim.
Yeah. We don't need them for goofy comedy. We don't. Just give us a story. Give them something to do at the very least, as opposed to whatever the they were doing.
Yeah. And to preface one other thing, and it's funny that you brought up the candy scene a few times, because I remember that sticking in my head as a kid. But if you look at the scene again, it's pretty much a product placement for candy. And I say that because there was actually an Adobe Flash tie-in video game that was exceptionally popular for some reason on PC in 2008 that was completely sponsored by the Juicy Drop Pop brand, or the Push Pop brand. I don't know who actually owns them. I'm brain farting on that. And it just gives me the vibes of, hey, kids, come see the movie, but kids like candy, and then we can get money from that candy. Therefore, let's put the candy in the movie with the kids.
It's almost like they put that in there so when, people are at the theater, if the parents try to, skip the concession stand so they can save a little money, then all of a sudden all this candy comes out. The kid looks over, Mom, can I have some candy? And parents are sitting there going, you movie.
And that's why, as a parent, you go to your nearest dollar store before a movie, and that's where you get your candy. I actually lucked out on that, though, because when I was living in Kelowna, there was actually a dollar store directly next door to a movie theater, which was probably the poorest decision that kind of area could have made in terms of cinema finances.
I mean, don't get me wrong. That dollar store probably made a ton of bank around that time, but yeah.
It's funny because I remember going in there too, and it was never like people just at the dollar store getting whatever random you need at the dollar store. It was literally before a movie, and there was probably about 20, 25 people in that candy aisle. I'm not even joking. It was actually hilarious to see.
Yeah, buying the candy that you could hide in the pocket so no one noticed it. They know. They know at the movie theater what you're doing.
They're 17 and they're working at the movie theater. They don't care what you bring into the theater. I'm not condoning it. Once again, we're not condoning anything. We're stand-up citizens.
Not saying, but we're not saying. Matthew Fox and Scott Porter as Rex Racer / Racer X. I'm going to let you handle the both of them in the same role.
I didn't hate them, didn't love them. Like, I think Matthew Fox does a good enough job, but like, I just don't quite understand why you needed the entire facial reconstruction part of the movie. Because, and it's not to say that it's not inherently warranted. Like, I get why he had to go undercover. He was doing this at the end of the day to protect the people closest to him, all that jazz. But I mean, Batman wears a suit with a very similar face covering, and no one knows who he is. I'm just saying.
Superman in the glasses, people. Superman in the glasses.
Right? Where I'm like, it's not inherently a bad thing, but I also remember watching the movie as a kid and consistently watching that like crash scene and then his facial reconstruction scene and just not understanding whatsoever, which is once again leads us back to who was this movie for at the time?
Clearly it was for Nicolas Cage to be able to say, I took his face off.
Touche. Oh man.
I will say though, talk about Matthew Fox first as Racer X, the older version, the post-facial reconstruction version. His tenor when he was speaking, you know, and I'll admit, I didn't go back and watch the cartoon, like a few episodes just to kind of get the vibe. I went straight into the film because, you know what, sometimes you just want to jump right into the deep end with all the candy. But his tenor as he was speaking, in my mind, was how Racer X talked in the cartoon. Like, he gave that kind of, you know, on the edge. You weren't quite sure exactly where, you know, his allegiances lay. Like, he was a little bit, you know, ambiguous in who he was really working for. And I like that. Scott Porter as younger Rex Racer, didn't mind him as either. And by the way, because I knew the cartoon, I knew that Rex was Racer X. But I like the fact that they tried to skew it a little bit. And it's like, you're not him. And people will probably, you know, fans who watch the cartoon going, wait, what? What? And then they do the facial reconstruction. Like, yeah, that's right. That's how you speed racer. That's exactly what Racer X would have done. Damn movie.
Yeah, no, I can appreciate that. And at the end of the day, like, I have no issues with either actor portraying him at the end of the day. Like, honestly, I'm just brain farting on. Is it Matthew Porter?
It's Scott Porter.
Scott Porter, thank you. Like, when one of my, probably, I'm going to preface this now, probably my favorite scene in this movie is near the start when they're at Thunderhead and Speed is sitting on Rex's lap and they're about to hit the jump. And they go over the jump and the car, you see the front of it, and then all of a sudden it turns into like a dust, and then the modern day sets it and the Mach 6 rolls past it. And this scene to me is incredible. They go through, you see him racing the Ghost, which is, I feel like, another thing a lot of racing people can relate to, because if you're a big racing fan like myself, whenever you're playing a game like Forza Motorsport or Gran Turismo, Assetto Corsa, whenever you're trying to improve your lap times, you're racing against a literal ghost car. Even in things like Mario Kart, you can do it in time trials. And that scene of when they're side by side and they look over at each other and Speed is envisioning this in his mind and he lets off the gas. Perfection. Like, I absolutely, like, beautiful. Absolutely beautiful.
Roger Allam as Mr. Arnold Royalton. So over the top. So British.
I love
villain.
it though. I love it though. Do you not love it?
Oh, that dude ate the scenery and then came back for dessert. But the thing is, it is a PG film. You're aiming for kids. You're aiming to bring in people of a younger age to come see it. And that's the kind of villain you want. You want someone to be stage villain, not screen villain, not subtle. This film is not subtle at all. Anywhere. This film doesn't know the word subtle. So you want Royalton to be so cartoony and so over the top. And I love it. I love that he does that.
Going back to the scene we spoke about before with his speech, and they're in the tower and everything, and he's going through what racing really is, quote unquote. What did you feel during that scene?
See, there's so much. Like, his soliloquies, even the point where he's watching the races as Speed is starting to win and pacing back and forth. Every time he was on the screen, his emotions and his thoughts were there, not just in his script and his dialogue and his delivery, but in his actions and in his presence. Like, it's hard to think of anyone in this film who commanded each camera shot that they were in just on sheer presence and body language alone.
And the closest one I think we get to that truly could arguably be Pops. Like, it's one of those things where it scratches the right itch for me. And there's nothing about his character that when I see him, I don't go, yes, I'm seeing you again. I'm okay with this.
Yeah. Even if you go back to like Cars 2, right? And the baddie is a British car. Like, it's a little bit of a cliche having the British baddie, but cliches exist because they work in a film that doesn't try to be subtle. This film is putting all its cards out on the table in 3D for everyone to see. There's no ambiguity here. He is the baddie, and it's awesome.
I love everything you said there, except for the fact that you brought up Cars 2. I don't want to remember that movie in the slightest.
I like Cars 2.
You like Cars 2?
I did like Cars. We talked about Cars 2 early on in this podcast history, and I will still defend Cars 2. Now, keep in mind, my oldest loved the Cars franchise growing up. So I watched a lot of Cars films. I will say Cars 2 is not the worst Cars film.
I would agree with that. Cars 3 is worse. If we're thinking the same way.
Cars 3 is total trash.
Awful. But the one thing I will say to that is I remember being, when did it come out? 2010, 2011, I want to say.
Probably.
I remember,
that, yeah.
Being 9, 10 years old and walking out of the theater as a 9, 10-year-old being like, that was a Cars movie? And I don't know. Doesn't work for me, but that's a tangent for another time.
Oh, we've already covered that tangent on this show, so I'm sure we'll find a way to talk about Cars 2 at some point again, somewhere down the road. Kik Gurry as Sparky, the Australian Gomer Pyle of the film. Your thoughts?
I kind of love him. I know, like, he's kind of irrelevant through the whole movie, but to quote Spider-Man, he's the man in the chair in a lot of ways. And I feel like just as a molded character to just be pure comedy, I just enjoy him being around. Like, even in the scene where they're having the heavy conversation about the Grand Prix and all that, and all of a sudden he appears from behind the kitchen counter. It just cracks me up. It's absolute nonsense, but it's just, he delivers it well. He knows what he is, and he does it well to me.
See, here's the thing, and I need to put this out there. It's that there were times I'm sitting there going, oh, you are... I had to wonder. I had to question if he was putting on this completely over-the-top accent because he wanted to, I don't know, like, create some kind of... like if they were going for a vibe for Sparky. But no, he's that Australian. By the way, he also ended up in another Wachowski's film, Jupiter Ascending. So they must have liked working with him. But I don't know. You talked about Cars 2 and how it was kind of like a Mater story, right?
I was just about to say, are you going to Mater my boy Sparky right now?
I'm kind of Matering Sparky at this point. Like, not to the point of like Mater being just absolute dumb like a tire kind of thing. Sparky's not dumb. He's not dumb at all. But it's like he felt like the person who was there to be told to shut up and do his job.
See, I understand what you say, like you're saying too, and I understand why you kind of interpret it that way. But I also view him as a separation in a way between Speed's family and his job. At the end of the day, you never hear Pop's voice while Speed's driving. You never hear Mom's voice or Spritle. Trixie, I think you occasionally hear during the Casa Crisco event where she's in the helicopter and relaying information. But to me, Sparky is as much an inherently good character as the Mach 5 is. They kind of go side by side to me. And I interpret that through a racing perspective too, as you always need your crew chief, and the crew chief and the driver have a very special relationship. And when Sparky has that headset on and he's delivering the race strategy, he's not the Sparky you see outside of that event. He's a different person. And I really like how they interpret that in this movie.
See, I think I would have bought Sparky more had he gone with Speed and Trixie to go to the cross-country race as part of the team. Because, I mean, when Trixie's up in the helicopter and spotting for him, Sparky ain't there. And Speed's doing just fine on his own. And I get Sparky as part of the mechanic team. I get it. That's cool. But you have to be consistent with Sparky. And that's what they weren't. If Sparky went with them to that race because they couldn't do it without him, then you justify Sparky.
It does cement his character more. I agree with you on that part.
Yeah. I want to talk about one last character before we get on to the actual film and the filmmaking here, because comes on the screen and I get a little joy. I get a little smile. Because this film has Ben Burns. Talk about Shaft. Richard Roundtree. Not the cameo we thought we were going to get, but maybe the cameo we all deserved. How was your thoughts on Ben Burns as played by Shaft? Shaft!
I love how he interprets the character in this movie. And even in his ambiguity of when Speed is in the locker room before the race. And he says, the 43 pre, did you know you were going to win? And all he does is he turns and he goes, everyone thought Stickle and I hated each other. And he just shrugs and walks away. Like, I don't need to know anything more in that scene, because in so many ways, it cements the greatest fear Speed has after his conversation with Royalton, but also then changes the entire trajectory of the film, knowing that the villain isn't just Royalton anymore. It isn't just Snake Oiler. It isn't whatever kind of issues with the family it is. The villain becomes the league. It becomes the track. And you really feel that, especially in the final Grand Prix.
Yeah, it's no longer just a personal mission for Speed. It's a vendetta mission to reclaim his sport. And I like that. I love that aspect of it. And Richard Roundtree, I thought, played it at a perfect PG level. Like, you don't want to go too dark. You don't want to like really sit there and say, the entire racing career and history and all the entire league is evil. No, it's not.
He said what he had to say. And that's why it's such a perfect moment. And I give credit to the writers on that part, because that scene is brilliant.
Yeah. You further motivate Speed, but you do it without shattering everything he believes in. It's a good PG way of doing it.
Absolutely it is. And before we move on, I do want to add one more character to this list. And I briefly mentioned him. And that's Christian Oliver as Snake Oiler. And by the way, rest in peace, Christian Oliver, as he passed in January in a car accident with his children, unfortunately, which is just horrendous. But what did you think of him as a side villain in this movie?
See, here's a problem that this film does have. And that aside from Snake Oiler, the other drivers just feel like
NPCs?
random. Yeah, they feel like that is the perfect way to put it. They feel like NPCs. They feel like you're watching like rejects from Free Guy.
Yeah. No, I can get behind that in its entirety. And Snake Oiler is really the only one we get who's an on-track villain. And I will say one of the sickest scenes in the racing aspect of the movie is when they're on the mountain pass and he flips the car over and puts that wheel right next to his face and is just about to like put tread marks all over it. And then he gets off, shunts him, and goes forward. Like, that's miraculous. I love that scene so much.
All right, let's talk about the filmmaking of this, the look of the film, because there is a ton of green screen in this. Did you find some of it to be too much?
It's something I do battle with internally because I kind of do have to occasionally check myself. And what I said at the start of the episode when I said, this was intentional. You see the other movies that came around this time and how light years ahead graphically and VFX wise. So you have to remember the intentional aspect of it. And when I can put myself into that forefront as one of the biggest anime cartoon adaptations, I'll say anime adaptations at the time, I'm okay with it. I understand why they were doing it. And to me, once you kind of understand that aspect and rewatch the movie again, you really resonate with how colorful and how vibrant it is, because at the same time as it's a little obnoxious, the most of the time you see it is during the racing scenes. And that intensity, that color, that blur is such an innate racing element. And I think to me, when I can rationalize it that way, maybe not even rationalize is the right word, but compartmentalize it in that sense, I just really end up enjoying it.
Yeah. I mean, I'm going to make two movie references here. And this film kind of falls, as far as a chronology goes, this film falls right in the middle of the two films I'm about to talk about. And it shows the technology and how good it was. Okay. I want to step back 4 years prior to this, in 2004, and the release of Sky Captain and the World of Tomorrow. This is an absolutely fantastic film, shot almost entirely green screen and done to look like some of like the early Flash Gordon serials. It's one of my favorite Gwyneth Paltrow films of all time. It's so stylish and so cool looking, and it kind of paved the way for what a film like Speed Racer could do. But here's the thing. You want proof that Speed Racer worked as a visual feat. Scott Pilgrim does not exist if Speed Racer didn't succeed in what they were trying to do, because Scott Pilgrim really kind of took that anime adaptation over the top, fight lines and everything, and perfected it in a much more blended with the reality of their world. Because yes, they took Speed Racer and they really cartooned it. Scott Pilgrim kind of found the happy medium between Sky Captain and the World of Tomorrow and Speed Racer. And you take a look at those. We can't talk about either of those films on this show because they both are too good.
And I love that you brought this up too, because I also know at the time of release, Scott Pilgrim was a little bit kind of back and forth on if people liked it or not. And I remember having seen it a few years after it came out when I was just older and kind of learned about it, and watching it being like, I don't know. But I rewatched it about a year ago and I absolutely loved it. So when are we kind of gonna maybe not adjust our perception, but open our minds to the idea that just because something looks different and can be maybe a little much at times, does that inherently take away from the movie?
At times it can, and at times it doesn't. And you take a look at a movie like Run Lola Run, and that was the editing in Run Lola Run was like pop, 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 pop. Not that there was a lot of graphics or effects or anything, but it was manically edited. But it worked for that. And you take this, and it is to the extreme with how much they put onto the screen. But at the end of the day, it's an anime adaptation. So what were you expecting, dear world? Like, this is the Wachowskis who made The Matrix, who made a visually stunning trilogy of films leading up to this. What were you expecting them to do when they got an anime IP in their hands? And the thing is, anime still looks kind of like that. So anime fans are probably sitting there going, finally someone gets us. Which leads me to my next question. When it comes to the world of anime adaptations, you have some movies that got maybe a little skewered, like Ghost in the Shell and Attack on Titan, when it comes to live action remakes.
Last Airbender, even. Like all very similar vibes where people weren't happy with them a lot on release. And I'm glad you brought up this duality because you said it yourself. What were you expecting? Were you expecting this movie to be the grittiness of Iron Man in The Dark Knight? Or were you expecting this movie to attempt to channel the inner child to an extent and that color and that wonder and do something that had never been done before? I mean, look at The Matrix at the time. I'll still rewatch The Matrix to this day and be like, that scene is brilliant, but my God, is it weird? And that adds to it. And just another funny thing on the side, I think it's funny that the Wachowskis took an anime and made an adaptation of it, but then made The Matrix and turned it into the Animatrix.
Which clearly the two can go hand in hand. That's fine. But you take a look at some of the anime adaptations now, right? One Piece. They took the anime and for everything that it was, and they tried to stay as truthful as they could to it. Cowboy Bebop. I freaking love Cowboy Bebop, and they got robbed of future seasons. And swear to God, if Netflix had their wits about them, Cowboy Bebop season 2, make it happen because it was so good. But the things, it stayed faithful to it. You know, Ghost in the Shell, Last Airbender, you can sit there and say, okay, they were pointing to some of the casting and choices and maybe not liking some of those. And that's whatever. That's whatever. I got no problems with the casting because they're actors. You're playing fictional characters. But One Piece and Cowboy Bebop shows that there is a place in pop culture for anime to go from ink or computer to live action. And that doesn't happen if the Wachowskis don't take a chance and go as far as they did with Speed Racer and show what is actually possible on the screen.
This movie walked, so everything that came after it in the same genre, to an extent, could run quite easily. And one question I want to ask you before we move on here. Have you heard about the reboot of Speed Racer that J.J. Abrams is a part of? Because at the time, J.J. Abrams back in the 2000s was linked to doing this movie. But it's an Apple TV original show. Have you heard about this?
I have heard about it, and as I was doing my research, I'm like, is this really happening? And I look at IMDb, and it's not listed anywhere on IMDb. So I wonder, because again, you're also at this point where these streaming services are spending a ton of money on IP and developing these IP products, but then they're not committing beyond like that first season. Because you need to be able to develop these things, and you need to be able to do it in a way that justifies the amount of expense. If you're going to do a Speed Racer show, fine, cool, do it. I love it. But don't make it and then pull it away. Make it and develop it and give it the legs or the tires to breathe. Because Cowboy Bebop, to me, and again, this is personal opinion, is probably the best anime adaptation that I have seen. But I wanted more. And I'm sure I'm sure there are tons of series out there where people are like, that's awesome, give me more. And, you know, streamers are like, yeah, no. Because that's money. Don't do this if you're going to bail on it after one season. Do it. Make it good so people want more.
I can get behind you 100% on that. And I'm going to ask you one more thing here. Do you see the Venn diagram on one side, anime adaptations, and on the other side, video game adaptations? And then that middle part where they cross over and they're really good. But the ones I think of, for instance, The Last of Us as a TV show. Absolutely phenomenal TV show. But they didn't also follow beat for beat of what the video game did, because you just can't. You can't stuff 50 plus hours of gameplay into a 2-hour runtime or a 10-hour TV show. So maybe in this scenario, we've also learned through a film and television making perspective that we can have these IPs, we can have these storylines, but they don't always have to be exact to the source material on a meta level. And I think as that mentality develops, we're going to have a lot better adaptations from both these genres.
I think there's going to be a fear of doing a series of this and turning it into more of a straight comedy, kind of like what they did with Twisted Metal. And I mean, don't get me wrong, I love the Twisted Metal series. I had a real good laugh at that whole thing. It was fantastic. And given the absurdity of the IP that they were pulling from, since you mentioned video games, you know, the Twisted Metal series, it's cars shooting and crashing each other, and one of them happens to have a big old clown face on it. Like that's all that game is. You know, at least with The Last of Us and Fallout and even Halo, you have these series that have deep backstories. And I think that's a danger with an IP like Speed Racer. And I think if you're going to redo a Speed Racer movie today, have at it. But a series, I don't know if there's enough Speed Racer story to get into a series. There are better anime series that you can take and you can develop into a live action series and develop from, because there's more backstory. You take Gotcha Man, which was a series that was adapted for North American television known as Battle of the Planets. You take Gotcha Man and make that a live action, made for North America live action series. Hey, count me in, because I love watching Battle of the Planets as a kid. But there's more story. There's a true villain. There's a team of heroes. You know, they've got the ship. They've got all the vehicles. They got the toys. Let's be honest. And do something with that. But Speed Racer, from a depth of story perspective, it's a little light. If you're going to come in and say, we're going to do a 6 episode, one season, that's it, limited series, okay, you have enough bandwidth for that. But, and this kind of goes against what I was arguing earlier, in that develop it and don't bail on it. But if you come out and say, we're not going to drag this on, we're not going to, but we're going to put our all into it, okay. But I don't know if there's enough to really develop it. So, and the fact that it's not even showing on IMDb, I wonder how much of this is hopeful, wishful thinking. Because remember, I mean, this was a property that was being talked about in the 90s and didn't come out till 2008. So 16 years-ish of development. You want to talk about developmental hell, that's it, right there. I don't know if we're ready for Speed Racer, the series. But we could. Be curious to see.
It definitely would have to be a limited series. I agree with you on that part. Like, and it's not that I'm afraid to make it inherently full length, like 10 plus episodes, but I think it would be the perfect sample size to understand, hey, if you're a Speed Racer fan, congratulations, you now have 6 more episodes of relatively high production value content to add to your fan base. And on a worst case scenario, it probably doesn't get done ever again, because you just had the bomb of the movie and then you just forked out millions for a streaming, straight to streaming TV show that, once again, streaming is as volatile as an industry as we all know, could just be worse off. And I don't inherently know that Apple TV is going to sell subscribers because of a new Speed Racer show. It sold subscribers for Killers of the Flower Moon. When that came out, a massive Martin Scorsese movie that lost money in the box office, but at the end of the day, that's not what you're making it for. You're making it because he's one of the finest filmmakers of all time. Can you interpret Speed Racer remotely in the same realm, assuming it'll be a deficit.
I think you may want to trial bubble something like this, and hear me out. Okay. And by the way, any video game companies that are about to listen to what I say, you're welcome. You want a trial balloon Speed Racer? You take the IP and you develop a deep game. Like with the mechanics of a game like Wreckfest, but a deep storyline as well. And you have it like you're racing a series, and there's cut scenes where it blends into the idea of Speed trying to infiltrate the different teams and working his way up, kind of thing. Like you can have for lack of a better term, a racing RPG where it's car combat, Carmageddon, if you will. And if it sells, if people are excited for that, then you've trial ballooned the story, then work from there.
In a lot of ways, it's exactly what Alien Isolation did for the Alien franchise. After Alien Resurrection, that franchise was pretty much dead in the water with 20th Century Fox. Then Sega comes around and makes one of the best games of 2014. And then you have Prometheus. And then you have Alien Covenant. Well, actually, I'm pretty sure Prometheus came out before Alien Isolation. But when you even look now at Alien Romulus that just came out, Fede Alvarez took a lot of inspiration from that game. And Alien Romulus has been the most acclaimed Alien film since Aliens. And it's almost on the same trajectory. I remember getting the Wii game on Christmas of Speed Racer and loving it. And a game adaptation of a film or a film adaptation of a game follows the same trajectory of sports for me. You never would have the popularity of the NFL, the MLB, the NHL, hell, even NASCAR and Formula One without the game tie-ins that get the younger audience back into it. So I think you're onto something.
I mean, if you're looking to really tread lightly into the waters, cut a deal with a game like Rocket League. Have Racer X's car in there. Have the Mach 5. Have the Mach 6. Have all these different bad guy cars as skins that you can get for your vehicle in Rocket League. And then watch the conversation start. And then you develop your own game. And then watch the conversation continue. And then say, we have heard you, dear internet. Here is the series that you've been pining for. But slowly, little by little, just feed them a little bit. Give them peanuts.
I think that's the right track.
All right. Well, we've come to the end of our track here. But before we go, Carson, who is your MVP of Speed Racer?
It's Roger Allam. It has to be. Every time he's on screen, we talked about it. I love his presence. I love his over-the-top attitude. I love the way his character thinks in the movie and how even though he's the villain, he has such a strong, technically factual belief in the industry he's in, but it's taken down by the main character in a way that no one in the movie thought could actually happen from a small budget racing team. And he just encapsulates exactly thematically what I want from a Speed Racer film as an adult, as a racing fan, as a fan of this franchise.
Yeah, Roger Allam was on my short list because I liken his villain performance to Armand Assante in the Sylvester Stallone version of Judge Dredd. Again, a very stage villain, but that's my short list. As is Christina Ricci, because she's freaking awesome. But no, my MVP is John Goodman, because this film, for all the explosions and death and murdering and monkeys flinging poop that this film has, there actually is quite a bit of heart. And half of that heart, or at least 3/4 of that heart, is because John Goodman is freaking John Goodman.
Cannot agree more. He was my second pick.
Yeah. To me, it went John Goodman and then literally tied between Roger Allam and Christina Ricci because they were pitch perfect in this film. Carson, thank you so much for this I was going to say eye candy, but more like eye Red Bull of a film for me to watch, please remind our listeners out there where they can find you out there on the interwebs.
You can find me at Carson Elk 12 ELC 12 at X or Twitter, whatever you want to call it.
Yes, Twitter X. That's what we'll call it. But
I like that. Let's do it.
Right. Now you have to get the suit with like the X on it, but it'll be like Elon Musk's X.
To go on one small last tangent, I was on eBay on Sunday after I watched the movie trying to find a replica of Speed Racer's helmet from this movie. And I can't remember what company did it, but there are some you can find on eBay. So if anyone wants to donate me $500, it would be greatly appreciated.
But you can make all those checks payable to It's Not That Bad, care of. No, sorry, I'm just kidding. I'm not going to take your Mach 5 helmet money. Not today. Tomorrow maybe, but not today. Carson, thank you. And dear listeners, you guys know the drill. If there is a movie out there that you think is unfairly maligned or is just so bad that there is no way in the anime universe that we can find anything good to say about it, hit us up on social media at NotThatBadcast or go to our website at notthatbadcast.com. And while you're there, make sure you check out our blog where we have posted the movies that we're going to be talking about during Mocktober. Until next time, he's Carson. I'm Jay. You guys are awesome. This is It's Not That Bad, a proud member of the Pantheon Podcast Network. Take care.